I opened the safe, and I opened a war.
You'll end up alone and penniless, James. Clarissa's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade through butter, her perfectly manicured fingers adjusting the collar of her $1,000 suit as Judge Morrison handed down his final ruling. She didn't even look at me when she said it, just stared straight ahead with that ice-cold smile I'd fallen in love with 22 years ago. The gavel came down like a thunderclap. Everything I'd built, everything I'd worked for, gone. The penthouse, overlooking Glacier Heights, the construction company. Heck, even my own kids looked at me like I was something they'd scrape off their shoes. This court awards full custody of the minor child Nathan Tate to the plaintiff, along with primary residence and 70% of all marital assets, Judge Morrison droned on. But I'd stopped listening after Alone and Broke. My daughter Lila, 18 and full of righteous fury, leaned forward in the gallery. "You deserve this, Dad. Mom told us everything." Everything. Right. I wondered if everything included how Mommy had been screwing Scott Vaughn in our bed for the past 8 months. Probably not. The courtroom emptied like water down a drain. Clarissa's heels clicked against the marble floor as she swept past me, trailing her lawyer and her mother Lenore behind her like a queen with her court. Lenore, that bitter old witch who'd been whispering poison in Clarissa's ear since the day we met, paused just long enough to lean close. "The Evers women always win, Jimmy," she whispered, her breath smelling like cigarettes and expensive perfume. "Always have, always will." Then they were gone, leaving me alone with my court-appointed attorney, a kid fresh out of law school who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. "I'm sorry, Mr. Tate," he mumbled, shoving papers into his briefcase. "We can appeal, but..." "But what?" I stood up, my knees creaking like old floorboards. "But I'm screwed? But my wife played the system better than I did? But 22 years of marriage doesn't mean crap when she's got Judge Morrison's golf buddy representing her?" The kid flinched. "That's not... there's no evidence of impropriety." "Get out!" I was done. Done with lawyers, done with the system, done with pretending any of this was fair. An hour later, I was driving my beat-up Ford pickup through the winding mountain roads toward the old Tate farmhouse. The place had been in my family for 3 generations, sitting on 40 acres of prime Montana real estate that somehow, miraculously, the judge hadn't awarded to my dear wife, probably because it was falling apart and worth more as a teardown than anything else. The house looked like something out of a horror movie, peeling white paint, sagging porch, windows so dirty you couldn't see through them. My grandfather had built it in 1952, back when Glacier Heights was still a real working town instead of the tourist trap it had become. My father had grown up here, and so had I, until I was 16 and couldn't wait to get the heck out. Funny how life comes full circle. I parked in the gravel driveway and sat there for a minute, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The mountains loomed around me like sleeping giants, their peaks still capped with snow even though it was late May. This was home now. This broken-down relic was all I had left. The front door stuck, swollen with decades of mountain weather. I had to put my shoulder into it before it gave way with a groan that echoed through the empty rooms. The smell hit me immediately. Dust, mold, and something else. Something that reminded me of my father. I'd been avoiding this place for 15 years, ever since Dad died and left it to me in his will. Clarissa had wanted to sell it, of course. "It's just sitting there rotting, Jimmy. We could get $500,000 for the land alone." But something had always stopped me. Some stubborn streak that ran deeper than common sense. Now I was glad I'd kept it. The electricity still worked, barely. A few bulbs flickered to life when I flipped the switches, casting long shadows across rooms that hadn't seen regular use since I was a teenager. The furniture was covered in white sheets like ghosts, and everything creaked when I walked across the hardwood floors. I made it as far as the kitchen before the reality of my situation hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. This was it. This was my life now. 43 years old, divorced, broke, and living in a house that should have been condemned years ago. My phone buzzed, a text from Lila. "Hope you're happy now. Mom's crying." I turned the phone off and threw it on the counter hard enough to crack the screen. That night, I lay on a musty mattress in my old bedroom, staring at water stains on the ceiling and listening to the house settle around me. Every creak and groan sounded like laughter, like the whole cursed place was mocking me for coming back with my tail between my legs. But it was better than being homeless. And tomorrow, I'd start figuring out how to put my life back together. I had no idea that everything I needed was already here, waiting in the walls. 3 days into my new life as a broke hermit, I decided the kitchen wall had to go. It wasn't a rational decision. Nothing about my situation was rational. But the wall separating the kitchen from what used to be a pantry was ugly, unnecessary, and right now I needed to hit something that wouldn't hit back. I'd found Dad's old sledgehammer in the barn, along with most of his tools. The weight of it felt good in my hands, solid, purposeful. The first swing sent a spiderweb of cracks through the drywall. The second punch a hole clean through. "Take that, you piece of crap," I muttered, winding up for another swing. It felt good to destroy something, even if it was my own property. Every blow was Clarissa's smug face. Every crack was Judge Morrison's gavel. Every chunk of falling plaster was another piece of my old life crumbling away. By noon, I'd demolished most of the wall. Dust hung in the air like fog, and my arms ached in a way that reminded me I wasn't 25 anymore. But I felt better than I had in months. There's something therapeutic about destruction when your world's already been blown apart. That's when I saw it. Behind the wall, where the studs met the foundation, there was another wall. Older, made of rough-hewn timber that looked like it had been there since the house was built. And in the center of that wall, almost hidden by decades of dust and cobwebs, was a door. Not a big door, maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, like something built for a child. Or for hiding things. My heart started pounding as I cleared away the debris. The door was solid oak, dark with age, held shut by a simple iron latch that looked hand-forged. When I lifted the latch, the hinges screamed like they hadn't been opened in decades. The space behind the door was small, maybe 6 feet square and just tall enough for me to stand upright. But it wasn't empty. In the center of the hidden room sat a steel safe, black and imposing as a tombstone. And on top of the safe, written in my father's careful handwriting on a piece of yellowed paper, were 2 words, "For James." My hands shook as I picked up the note and unfolded it. Dad's handwriting was exactly as I remembered, precise, no nonsense, like the man himself. "Son, if you're reading this, then everything I planned has worked out exactly as I hoped it would. I know you're probably angry right now, probably feeling like the world has screwed you over and there's no way to fight back. I felt the same way once, 30 years ago, when I lost everything to the same family that just took everything from you. That's right, Jimmy. The Evers women have been playing this game longer than you know. Lenore did to me exactly what Clarissa just did to you. Same lies, same manipulation, same result. The only difference is, I was smart enough to prepare for round 2. The combination to the safe is your mother's birthday, month, day, year. Inside, you'll find everything you need to understand what really happened to both of us, and, more importantly, how to make sure it never happens to another generation of Tate men. The Evers women play the long game, son, but so do we. Now open the safe and learn how to win. Love, Dad." I read the note 3 times before the words really sank in. My father had known this would happen. Somehow he'd seen it coming 30 years ago and had been planning for it ever since. Mom's birthday, July 15th, 1943. My fingers trembled as I turned the dial, left to 7, right to 15, left to 43. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard a soft click, and the heavy door swung open. The safe was packed with documents, photographs, and what looked like audio cassettes. On top of everything was another note, this one shorter. "Welcome to the war, son. Time to learn the rules." I pulled out the first manila folder and opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all black and white, all dated from the early 1990s. They showed a younger Lenore Evers with various men around town, men I recognized even 30 years later. The bank president, the mayor, Judge Morrison himself, looking considerably younger, but just as corrupt. Under the photos was a thick journal bound in cracked leather. I opened it to the first page and saw my father's handwriting again. The Lenore Evers investigation started, March 15th, 1993. Reason, that witch destroyed my life. Time to return the favor. I sank down onto the dusty floor and started reading. According to Dad's meticulous notes, Lenore Evers had been running the same con for decades. She'd identify successful men in town, men with property, businesses, or political influence, and then she'd seduce them. Not for a one-night stand, but for the long haul. She'd move in, gain their trust, learn their secrets, and then systematically destroy them. The pattern was always the same. First came the accusations, misuse, infidelity, financial impropriety. Then came the lawyers, always the same firm that Lenore had been feeding information to for years. Finally came the settlement, which invariably left the man with nothing and Lenore with everything. She'd done it to at least a dozen men over the years. The bank president had lost his house and his position. The mayor had been forced to resign in disgrace. 3 different business owners had been driven into bankruptcy. And then there was my father. March 20th, 1993. She's got her hooks in me deep. Moved into the farmhouse last week. Says she loves the rustic charm. What she loves is the 40 acres of prime real estate it sits on. I can see it in her eyes when she thinks I'm not looking. She's already planning how to subdivide it. April 2nd, 1993. Found her going through my business papers. She says she's just trying to understand my world better. Right. She's mapping out my assets like a general planning a siege. April 15th, 1993. She started the accusations. Claims I hit her during an argument about her daughter. Complete BS, but who's going to believe me over a crying woman with bruises? Note, check if she's doing the bruises herself. Wouldn't put it past her. May 1st, 1993. Served with papers today. She's claiming domestic misuse, wants the house, the business, everything. Her lawyer is David Crane, same bastard who represented her in 3 other cases I've now documented. This isn't coincidence. It's a pattern. The journal went on for months, documenting Dad's growing realization that he was being systematically destroyed by a woman who had turned manipulation into an art form. But unlike her other victims, Dad had started fighting back. June 10th, 1993. Hired a private investigator. Sean O'Malley, ex-cop, knows how to dig up dirt. If Lenore wants to play dirty, I'll show her what dirty really looks like. July 4th, 1993. O'Malley hit pay dirt. Lenore's been married 4 times before, always to men with money or property. Every marriage ended the same way. Accusations, divorce, settlement heavily in her favor. She's not just a gold digger, she's a professional destroyer of men. August 15th, 1993. More evidence. Lenore's been feeding information to David Crane for years, helping him build cases against her own lovers. They're partners in this. She provides the inside information, he provides the legal muscle. It's a twisted conspiracy. I looked up from the journal, my head spinning. This wasn't just about my divorce. This was about a generational war between the Evers women and the men they targeted. And now, it was my turn to fight back. I reached for the next folder labeled Clarissa, Phase 2. The Clarissa folder was thicker than her mother's, and for good reason. Dad had been watching my wife for over 20 years, documenting every move she made, every pattern she followed, every sign that she was following in Lenore's footsteps. The earliest entry was dated just 6 months after Clarissa and I got married. January 12th, 2002. She's got the same look in her eyes that her mother had. Jimmy doesn't see it yet. He's too in love to notice the way she studies everything, cataloging assets, making mental notes. But I see it. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. March 5th, 2002. Clarissa's pushing Jimmy to expand the business faster than he should. More debt, more risk, more assets to divide if things go south. She's not building a marriage, she's building a target. June 20th, 2002. Lila was born today. Beautiful little girl. I pray she doesn't inherit the family curse, but looking at Clarissa holding her, I can already see the calculations. This child isn't just a daughter, she's leverage. Page after page, year after year, Dad had documented Clarissa's slow transformation from loving wife to calculating predator. He'd tracked her law school enrollment, her friendship with David Crane's daughter, her gradual takeover of our family's financial decisions. September 15th, 2010. Clarissa's been spending a lot of time at the courthouse, researching cases, she claims. But I've been watching. She's studying divorce proceedings, learning the system, making connections. She's not researching for clients. She's researching for herself. December 3rd, 2015. Jimmy's business is doing well, too well for Clarissa's taste. She needs him to fail, needs him to look like the irresponsible one when the time comes. She's been pushing him to take bigger risks, make flashier investments, setting him up for a fall. May 17th, 2020. It's starting. Clarissa's been distant, picking fights, creating a paper trail of marital problems. She's also been seen around town with Scott Vaughn. The affair isn't about passion, it's about positioning. She needs Jimmy to look like the wrong party while she plays the victim. The final entry was dated just 3 months ago, February 10th, 2024. It's almost time. Clarissa's filed the papers, made her accusations, lined up her witnesses. Jimmy's about to lose everything, just like I did. But this time we're ready. This time, the Evers women are going to learn what it feels like to be destroyed. Under the journal was a thick stack of photographs, documents, and audio cassettes. Dad had been busy. Bank records showing suspicious transfers from our business account to accounts controlled by Lenore. Photos of Clarissa meeting secretly with David Crane months before she filed for divorce. Even recordings of phone conversations where she and her mother planned their strategy. But the real treasure was in the final folder labeled The Nuclear Option. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Deeds, contracts, and legal papers going back decades, all meticulously organized and annotated in Dad's careful handwriting. It was a complete map of the Evers family's criminal enterprise, with names, dates, and evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and extortion going back 30 years. Lenore and her network of lawyers, judges, and business associates hadn't just been running divorce scams. They'd been manipulating property deals, fixing court cases, and systematically looting the wealth of Glacier Heights' most successful men. It was organized crime disguised as family law. And Clarissa was the next generation, trained from birth to carry on the family business. At the bottom of the folder was one final note from Dad. Jimmy, by now, you understand what you're up against. This isn't just about your marriage. It's about a criminal conspiracy that's been operating in plain sight for decades. The evidence in this safe is enough to destroy them all, but you have to be smart about how you use it. Don't go to the police. Half of them are on Lenore's payroll. Don't try to fight them in court. The system is rigged in their favor. If you want justice, you're going to have to take it yourself. I've given you the tools. Now it's up to you to decide how to use them. Make them pay, son. Make them all pay. Dad, P.S. Sean O'Malley is still around. He's older, drinks too much, but he's the only investigator in town who can't be bought. You'll need his help. I sat in that hidden room for hours, reading through decades of evidence, understanding for the first time that my divorce wasn't a personal failure. It was the latest battle in a war that had been going on since before I was born. But this time, the Evers women had made a mistake. They'd destroyed a man whose father had spent 30 years preparing for revenge. I gathered up the files and locked them back in the safe. Then I walked out of that hidden room and into the kitchen, where my cracked phone was still sitting on the counter. It was time to make some calls. The first call was to Sean O'Malley, private investigator. His office was above Murphy's Bar on Main Street, and according to the phone book, he was still in business. O'Malley Investigations, a gravelly voice answered after 6 rings. Mr. O'Malley, this is James Tate. I think you knew my father. There was a long pause, then, Jesus Christ, I wondered when you'd call. Took you long enough, kid. Your old man said you'd come around eventually. Can we meet? Murphy's Bar, 1 hour. And Jimmy, bring cash. This conversation is going to cost you. The second call was harder. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Mick Redford, my old boxing coach from high school. Mick ran a gym downtown and had always been straight with me, even when everyone else was blowing smoke up my back. Mick's gym. Mick, it's Jimmy Tate. Well, I'll be blessed. Heard you got your pride handed to you in court. About time you called. I need to talk to someone who isn't going to BS me. Then get over here. I'll put the coffee on. I looked around the farmhouse one more time before I left. The place looked different now. Not like a relic of failure, but like a fortress. A place where plans were made and wars were won. The Evers women thought they'd destroyed me. They had no idea they'd just woken up something that had been sleeping for 30 years. Time to show them what a real villain looked like. Sean O'Malley looked exactly like what you'd expect from an ex-cop turned private investigator who'd been drinking his way through 20 years of other people's dirty secrets. Weathered face, reddened eyes, and a handshake that could crack walnuts. He was sitting in the back corner of Murphy's Bar when I walked in, nursing a whiskey that probably wasn't his first of the day. You look like your old man, he said as I slid into the booth across from him. Same stubborn jaw, same angry eyes. He had those same eyes after Lenore Evers got done with him. You helped him gather evidence against her. Helped him? Kid, I spent 3 years documenting that woman's crimes. Your father paid me more money than I made in 5 years as a cop, and every penny was worth it. He took a sip of whiskey and studied me. Question is, what are you planning to do with all that evidence? I'm planning to destroy them. O'Malley laughed, a harsh sound like gravel in a blender. That's what your father said. You know what happened to him? He died of a heart attack. He died of frustration, spent the last 10 years of his life planning the perfect revenge and never got the chance to execute it. All that evidence, all those plans, and he took them to his grave. O'Malley leaned forward. But you're not dead yet, are you, Jimmy? You've got something he never had. What's that? Time. And a target that's finally made a mistake. I pulled out one of the photographs from Dad's files. Clarissa meeting with David Crane 6 months before she filed for divorce. What kind of mistake? The kind that leaves a paper trail. Your wife got cocky, thought she was untouchable. But I've been watching her, just like I watched her mother. She's been sloppy. O'Malley reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. Your father left me instructions. If you ever came looking for help, I was supposed to give you this. Inside the envelope were recent photographs. Clarissa and Scott Vaughn at the Glacier Heights Motel. Clarissa meeting with Judge Morrison at his country club. Clarissa and her mother counting cash in what looked like a storage unit. I've been building a case against the Evers family for 30 years, O'Malley said. Your father's evidence was just the foundation. This is the house. We spent the next 2 hours going through O'Malley's files. He documented everything. Bank transfers, bribery payments, witness intimidation, evidence tampering. The Evers family hadn't just been running divorce scams, they'd been operating a full-scale criminal enterprise. The problem, O'Malley said, is that half the law enforcement in this county is on their payroll. You try to take this to the authorities, it'll disappear faster than a beer at an Irish wake. So, what do you suggest? Your father had the right idea. You want justice? You're going to have to take it yourself, but you're going to need help. That's when he told me about the others. Men who'd been destroyed by the Evers family over the years, men who'd lost everything and were hungry for payback. O'Malley had kept in touch with all of them, building a network of allies who were just waiting for someone to lead them into battle. Think of it as a support group, O'Malley said with a grin. Except instead of talking about our feelings, we're planning to ruin the people who ruined us. From Murphy's Bar, I drove across town to Mick's gym. The place hadn't changed much since I was 18. Same heavy bags, same speed bags, same smell of sweat and determination. Mick was in his office, a cramped space above the main gym floor that overlooked the boxing ring. You look like heck, he said as I walked in. Feel worse. Mick poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration. Heard Clarissa took you to the cleaners. Also heard she's been spreading stories around town about what a bastard you are. What kind of stories? The usual, you're controlling, you're drunk, you're a failure as a husband and father. She's got half the town convinced you're some kind of monster. Mick handed me a cup of coffee. Of course, the other half remembers when you built half the houses in Glacier Heights and never cheated anyone out of a dime. Which half is bigger? Depends on the day. But I'll tell you one thing. People in this town love a good story. And right now, Clarissa's story is more interesting than yours. That's when I told him about the safe, about Dad's evidence, about the 30-year conspiracy that had been operating under everyone's noses. Mick listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every revelation. Jesus Christ, Jimmy. You're talking about bringing down half the power structure in this town. I'm talking about justice. Same thing. Mick leaned back in his chair. Question is, are you ready for what that's going to cost you? Because once you start this war, there's no going back. They're going to come at you with everything they've got. They already took everything I had. No, they didn't. You're still breathing, still thinking, still fighting. That's more than most men have after Lenore Evers gets done with them. Mick stood up and walked to the window overlooking the gym. You want my advice? Don't just destroy them. Make sure everyone in town sees it happen. Make it public, make it messy, make it impossible to ignore. How? Same way you built your reputation in the first place. One project at a time, one victory at a time, until everyone knows your name. Mick turned back to me. But first, you're going to need to get back in fighting shape. Can't wage war when you look like you've been living on whiskey and regret. He was right. I'd lost 20 pounds since the divorce proceedings started, and not in a good way. My clothes hung loose, my hands shook, and I looked like exactly what Clarissa was telling people I was, a broken man who'd given up. When do we start? I asked. Right now? Mick grabbed a pair of boxing gloves from a hook on the wall. Time to remember what it feels like to hit back. I spent the next 3 hours in that gym, working out frustrations on heavy bags and speed bags, rediscovering muscles I'd forgotten I had. Every punch was Clarissa's face. Every combination was Judge Morrison's gavel. Every round was another step back toward being the man I used to be. By the time I left Mick's gym, I had a plan. Not just for revenge, but for war. A systematic campaign to expose the Evers family's crimes and destroy their network of corruption. It was going to take time, patience, and careful planning. But I had something they didn't expect. 30 years of evidence and a network of allies who were just as hungry for justice as I was. The Evers women had made their first mistake when they destroyed my father. Their second mistake was thinking they could do the same thing to me. They were about to learn the difference between a victim and a villain. The first move in my war against the Evers family happened at Murphy's bar on a Tuesday night, and it was so subtle that most people didn't even notice it happening. I'd been planning for 2 weeks, working with O'Malley to identify the key players in Lenore's network and map out their vulnerabilities. The beauty of a small town like Glacier Heights is that everyone knows everyone else's business, which means everyone also knows everyone else's secrets. My target that night was Tom Bradley, president of First Mountain Bank and one of Lenore's earliest victims. According to Dad's files, Lenore had seduced Bradley back in 1995, gained access to his personal and professional accounts, and then destroyed him with accusations of embezzlement. Bradley had lost his job, his wife, and his reputation, but he'd managed to avoid prison by agreeing to pay restitution for crimes he didn't commit. 29 years later, he was tending bar at Murphy's and drinking away what was left of his life. "Tom," I said, sliding onto a bar stool, "we need to talk." Bradley looked up from the glass he was polishing, his eyes wary. "Jimmy Tate, heard you got the Lenore Evers treatment. Sorry about that." "Don't be sorry. Be angry." I pulled out one of the photographs from Dad's files, Lenore leaving Bradley's house with a briefcase full of bank documents. "Recognize this?" Bradley's face went white. "Where did you get this?" "My father, he's been documenting Lenore's crimes for 30 years. This photo proves you were set up." "Proves it to who? The same judges and cops who helped her destroy me in the first place?" "Proves it to the town. Proves it to everyone who believed her lies." I leaned forward. "Tom, what if I told you there was a way to get your reputation back? A way to make everyone understand that you weren't a criminal, you were a victim?" Bradley set down the glass with shaking hands. "I'd say you're dreaming. Lenore Evers has been untouchable for 40 years. She's got half the power structure in this town in her pocket. Had, past tense. Because I've got evidence that's going to bring down her entire network." I pulled out another photograph, this one showing Lenore meeting with Judge Morrison. "Including the judge who sentenced you?" For the next hour, I laid out everything I knew about the Evers family conspiracy. Bradley listened in stunned silence as I showed him evidence of bribes, witness tampering, and evidence fabrication that went back decades. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "You're talking about a criminal organization. I'm talking about justice. But I need help. I need people who know how the system really works. People who understand how Lenore operates." Bradley looked around the empty bar, then back at me. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to start talking. Not to the police, not to the courts, but to people. Customers, friends, anyone who'll listen. I want you to tell them the truth about what Lenore Evers did to you." "And then what?" "Then we move to the next target, and the next one, until everyone in town understands what's been happening here." Bradley was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached under the bar and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. The good stuff, not the rot gut he usually served. "You know what the worst part was?" he said, pouring 2 shots. "It wasn't losing my job, or my money, or even my wife. It was the way people looked at me afterward, like I was some kind of monster who'd betrayed their trust. How would they look at you if they knew the truth?" Bradley knocked back his shot and slammed the glass on the bar. "Let's find out." The second phase of my campaign began the next morning at Mick's gym. I'd been working out there every day for 2 weeks, rebuilding my strength and my confidence. But more importantly, I'd been listening to the conversations around me. Glacier Heights might be a small town, but Mick's gym was the unofficial headquarters for every contractor, mechanic, and blue-collar worker in the county. These were my people, men who'd built this town with their own hands and who understood the difference between honest work and criminal manipulation. "Jimmy," called out Pete Morrison, no relation to the judge, as I walked in. Pete ran the biggest roofing company in the valley and had been a friend since high school. "Heard you're living out at the old farmhouse. How's that working out?" "Better than expected," I said, wrapping my hands for a heavy bag session. Turns out my father left me more than just a house. Yeah? Like what? I looked around the gym. There were maybe a dozen guys there, all of them people I'd known for years. People who'd trusted me with their homes, their businesses, their families. Like the truth about what's been happening in this town for the past 30 years. For the next 20 minutes, while I worked the heavy bag, I told them about the Evers family conspiracy. Not everything. I wasn't ready to show all my cards yet, but enough to plant seeds of doubt about the official story of my divorce. "You're telling us that Clarissa planned this whole thing?" asked Mike Santos, an electrician who'd worked on half my construction projects. "I'm telling you that Clarissa learned from the best. Her mother's been destroying men in this town since before we were born." "Bees," said Danny Walsh, a plumber who'd always been a little too quick to believe gossip. "Lenore Evers is a respected member of the community. She's on the hospital board, the school board." "She's a criminal," I said, punctuating each word with a punch to the heavy bag. "And I can prove it." The room went quiet except for the sound of my gloves hitting leather. Then Pete spoke up. "What kind of proof?" "The kind that's going to change everything." I left the gym that morning knowing that word would spread. By afternoon, half the town would be talking about Jimmy Tate's wild accusations against the Evers family. Some would dismiss it as the desperate lies of a bitter ex-husband, but others would start asking questions, and questions were exactly what I wanted. The third phase began that evening at the town council meeting. I hadn't been to one in years. Clarissa had always handled our family's civic duties, but tonight I had a reason to be there. The meeting was held in the basement of the courthouse, a cramped room with folding chairs and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were dying. About 30 people were scattered around the room, most of them the usual suspects who showed up to complain about potholes and property taxes. Lenore Evers sat in the front row, elegant and composed in a way that suggested she owned the place, which, according to Dad's files, she basically did. I took a seat in the back and waited for the public comment period. "The chair recognizes James Tate," said Mayor Davidson, a nervous little man who'd been in Lenore's pocket since his first campaign. I stood up and walked to the podium, feeling every eye in the room on me. This was it, the moment I stopped being a victim and started being something else entirely. "Thank you, Mayor Davidson. I'm here tonight to talk about corruption." A murmur ran through the room. Lenore's head turned slightly, but her expression didn't change. For 30 years, this town has been systematically looted by a criminal organization operating under the guise of family law. Successful men have been targeted, seduced, and destroyed through a combination of false accusations, judicial corruption, and witness intimidation. The murmur became a buzz. Mayor Davidson banged his gavel. "Mr. Tate, these are serious accusations. Do you have evidence to support—" "I have 30 years of evidence," I said, pulling out a manila folder. Bank records, photographs, recorded conversations, and documented proof of bribery, extortion, and conspiracy. Lenore Evers stood up and turned to face me. Even at 70, she was still beautiful in a cold, predatory way. Her smile could have frozen water. "Mr. Tate," she said in a voice like honey over broken glass, "I understand you're going through a difficult time. Divorce is never easy, especially when there are children involved, but making wild accusations isn't going to help your situation." "The only thing that's wild," I replied, "is that it's taken this long for someone to expose what you've been doing." The room erupted in conversation. Mayor Davidson banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Lenore continued to stare at me with that frozen smile, but I could see something else in her eyes now, fear. "Mr. Tate," the mayor said, "I'm going to have to ask you to limit your comments to matters of city business." "This is city business? When the wife of a sitting judge is running a criminal conspiracy, that's definitely city business." More chaos, more gavel banging. And through it all, Lenore Evers staring at me like she was memorizing my face for future reference. I gathered up my folder and headed for the door. As I passed Lenore's row, she spoke just loud enough for me to hear. "You have no idea what you've just started, Jimmy." I stopped and looked down at her. "Yes, I do. I've started a war, and unlike my father, I plan to finish it." I walked out of that courthouse knowing there was no going back. The Evers family now knew I was coming for them, and they'd use every resource at their disposal to destroy me before I could destroy them. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed I was fighting alone. They had no idea how many allies I'd already recruited, or how much evidence I'd already gathered. The war for Glacier Heights had officially begun. The Evers family's response came faster than I expected and hit harder than I was prepared for. It started the next morning with a visit from Sheriff Rick Coleman, a man who'd been taking Lenore's money for so long he probably didn't remember what honest law enforcement looked like. I was in the barn organizing Dad's tools when I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. "Jimmy Tate!" Coleman called out as he approached the barn. He was a big man, soft around the middle, but still dangerous in the way that corrupt cops always are. "Need to have a word with you." "About what?" "About the harassment complaint filed against you yesterday evening?" I set down the wrench I'd been holding and turned to face him. "Harassment complaint?" "Mrs. Lenore Evers says you've been stalking her, making threatening phone calls and spreading malicious lies about her family." Coleman pulled out a folded paper. "This is a restraining order. You're to stay at least 500 feet away from Mrs. Evers, her daughter, and her granddaughter at all times." I took the paper and read it quickly. It was signed by Judge Morrison, of course, and it painted me as an unhinged stalker who was targeting innocent women out of spite over my divorce. "This is BS, Rick, and you know it. What I know is that you made a scene at the town council meeting last night, making wild accusations without a shred of proof. What I know is that you've been drinking heavily and making threats against prominent members of the community." "I haven't been drinking, and I haven't made any threats." "That's not what I'm hearing. Word around town is that you've been telling people you're going to destroy the Evers family. That sounds like a threat to me." Coleman was right about one thing. Word was definitely getting around town, but it wasn't going the way I'd hoped. Instead of people asking questions about Lenore's past, they were talking about Jimmy Tate's breakdown. The narrative was being controlled, and it wasn't my narrative. "Rick, what if I told you I had evidence that Lenore Evers has been running a criminal conspiracy for 30 years? Coleman laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "I'd say you've been watching too many movies. Lenore Evers is one of the most respected women in this county. She's donated more money to charity than you've made in your entire life, with money she stole from the men she destroyed." "Prove it." That was the challenge, wasn't it? I had evidence, but I couldn't use it through official channels because the official channels were corrupted. I needed a different approach. "I will," I said. Coleman stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the coffee and cigarettes on his breath. "Jimmy, let me give you some free advice. Drop this crusade before it gets you into real trouble. Lenore Evers has friends in high places, and they don't like it when people make waves." "Is that a threat?" "That's a warning from someone who's known you since you were a kid and doesn't want to see you do something stupid." After Coleman left, I sat on the front porch and tried to figure out my next move. The restraining order was a problem. It meant I couldn't get within 500 feet of Lenore, Clarissa, or Lila without risking arrest. But more importantly, it was a public relations victory for them. Now I wasn't just a bitter ex-husband, I was a dangerous stalker. My phone rang. Sean O'Malley. "Heard you had a visit from Sheriff Coleman," he said. "News travels fast. Bad news travels faster. Jimmy, they're moving to discredit you before you can build momentum. Classic Lenore strategy. Attack the messenger so nobody listens to the message. So what do? You fight back, but not the way they expect." That afternoon, I drove to the offices of the Glacier Heights Gazette, the town's weekly newspaper. The editor was a woman named Sarah Chen, someone I'd known casually through business dealings over the years. She was young, ambitious, and, according to O'Malley, one of the few media people in town who wasn't in Lenore's pocket. "Jimmy Tate," she said as I walked into her cluttered office. "I heard you made quite a scene at the town council meeting." I told the truth. Apparently, that qualifies as making a scene these days. Sarah leaned back in her chair and studied me. "You look different, thinner, angrier. Divorce will do that to you. So will discovering that your entire life has been a lie." I pulled out one of the photographs from Dad's files. Lenore meeting with Judge Morrison at his country club. "Sarah, what would you say if I told you I had evidence of a criminal conspiracy involving some of the most powerful people in this county?" Sarah looked at the photograph, then back at me. "I'd say you better have more than one picture and a lot of anger." For the next 2 hours, I laid out everything I knew about the Evers family operation. Sarah listened without interrupting, taking notes and asking pointed questions about sources, dates, and corroborating evidence. "This is incredible," she said finally. "If even half of this is true, it's the biggest story in the history of this county." "It's all true. The question is, are you willing to print it?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked up at me with the expression of a reporter who just found the story of a lifetime. Jimmy, I'll print it. But I need more than photographs and your father's journal. I need sources who'll go on the record. Documents that can be independently verified. Evidence that will stand up in court. I can get you all of that. But it's going to take time. How much time? Give me 2 weeks. That night, I called a meeting of what O'Malley had started calling the Resistance, the network of men who'd been destroyed by the Evers family over the years. We met at the farmhouse, in the hidden room behind the kitchen wall. There were 6 of us. Myself, O'Malley, Tom Bradley from Murphy's Bar, Pete Morrison from the roofing company, Dr. Marcus Webb, a physician who'd lost his practice after Lenore accused him of inappropriate conduct, and David Chen, Sarah's older brother, who'd lost his restaurant in a rigged divorce settlement. Gentlemen, I said, looking around the cramped room, they've made the first move. Now it's our turn. I told them about the restraining order, about Coleman's visit, about the campaign to paint me as an unhinged stalker. But I also told them about Sarah Chen and the opportunity to get our story into print. The problem, said Dr. Webb, is that they control the narrative. They have the judges, the police, the social network. We're fighting an uphill battle. Every revolution is an uphill battle, O'Malley said. The question is whether we're willing to fight it. I am, said Tom Bradley. I've been living with their lies for 29 years. It's time for the truth. One by one, the others agreed. We spent the rest of the evening planning our campaign, not just to expose the Evers family, but to systematically dismantle their network of corruption. It was going to be dangerous. They had resources, connections, and 30 years of experience in destroying anyone who threatened them. But we had something they didn't expect. We had the truth, and we had nothing left to lose. The war for Glacier Heights was about to get very interesting. 2 weeks later, the Glacier Heights Gazette hit the stands with a front-page headline that sent shockwaves through the entire county. The Evers Files, 30 years of corruption exposed. Sarah Chen had outdone herself. The article was 12 pages long, meticulously researched and devastating in its detail. She'd interviewed all 6 members of our resistance group, verified Dad's evidence through independent sources, and even managed to track down 3 of Lenore's victims from other counties. The story laid out the entire conspiracy, the systematic targeting of successful men, the network of corrupt lawyers and judges, the fake evidence and witness intimidation. But more than that, it showed the human cost. Families destroyed, lives ruined, an entire community corrupted by one woman's greed. By noon, the Gazette's website had crashed from traffic. By evening, news trucks from Billings and Great Falls were parked outside the courthouse. By the next morning, the FBI had opened an investigation. I was in Mick's gym when O'Malley called with the news. It's happening, Jimmy. Federal agents just raided Lenore's house, David Crane's law office, and Judge Morrison's chambers. They've got warrants for financial records, communications, everything. I set down the weights I'd been lifting and stepped outside to take the call. What about Clarissa? They're at the penthouse right now. Word is, they found a safe full of documents that your wife probably wishes she'd destroyed years ago. Through the gym window, I could see the TV in Mick's office. The local news was showing footage of FBI agents carrying boxes out of the courthouse. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, Federal Investigation into Glacier Heights Corruption. Jimmy, O'Malley continued, you need to know, they're looking for you too, not as a suspect, as a witness. You're going to be the star of the biggest corruption trial in Montana history. That afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Daddy? It was Lila, my 18-year-old daughter, the one who told me I deserved everything that happened to me. She sounded different now, younger, scared. Lila, where are you? I'm at Nate's school. The FBI came to the house this morning. They arrested Mom and Grandma Lenore. They said... Her voice broke. They said Mom's been lying about everything. Where's your brother? He's with me. Daddy, we don't have anywhere to go. All our accounts are frozen and the penthouse is sealed off as evidence. For a moment, I felt a surge of satisfaction. This was what I'd wanted, to see Clarissa lose everything, to watch her perfect world crumble the way mine had. But hearing my daughter's voice, lost and frightened, I remembered something important. She was 18, old enough to make her own choices, old enough to face the consequences, but still my daughter. Come to the farmhouse, I said. Both of you. Daddy, I said terrible things to you. I believed Mom when she said, come home, Lila. We'll figure the rest out later. An hour later, I watched my children walk up the gravel driveway carrying 2 small suitcases between them. Lila looked like she'd aged 5 years and 5 hours. Nate, my 16-year-old son, looked angry and confused. "Is it true?" he asked as soon as they reached the porch. "Everything they're saying on the news, is it true?" "Most of it." "Mom really did all those things? The affairs, the lies, the fake evidence?" I looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time in months. He had my eyes and his mother's stubborn chin, and right now he looked like his entire world had been turned upside down. "Your mother made some very bad choices, Nate. Choices that hurt a lot of people, including our family." "But you knew, didn't you?" Lila said. "You've been planning this. The newspaper article, the FBI investigation. You made this happen." I exposed the truth. What happened after that was out of my hands. Lila stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Are you happy? Is this what you wanted?" It was a fair question. Was I happy? I'd gotten my revenge, destroyed the people who destroyed me, exposed a criminal conspiracy that had been operating for decades. I should have been celebrating. But looking at my children, homeless, confused, forced to choose between their parents, I wasn't sure what I felt. "I wanted justice," I said finally. "I wanted the truth to come out." "The truth," Nate said bitterly, "is that our family is destroyed." That evening, we sat around the kitchen table eating pizza and watching the news coverage of what reporters were already calling the biggest political scandal in Montana history. Judge Morrison had resigned. Sheriff Coleman was under investigation. David Crane's law firm had been shut down pending a federal audit, and in the county jail, Clarissa and Lenore Evers were being held without bail on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. "What's going to happen to them?" Lila asked. "They'll go to trial. If they're convicted, they'll go to prison." "For how long?" "A long time." Lila was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Daddy, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I believed her lies. Sorry I said those things to you. Sorry I chose her side." "You were protecting your mother. I understand that." "No, you don't understand. I knew something was wrong. Deep down, I knew Mom was lying about some things. But it was easier to believe her than to admit that my whole life was built on lies." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Your whole life wasn't built on lies, Lila. The love I have for you and Nate, that's real. That's the only thing that matters now." 3 days later, I was sitting in a federal courthouse in Great Falls, testifying before a grand jury about 30 years of corruption in Glacier Heights. I told them everything about Dad's investigation, about the hidden safe, about the evidence that had been collected over 3 decades. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer Walsh, walked me through each piece of evidence methodically. Bank records, photographs, recorded conversations, witness statements. It painted a picture of systematic criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for decades. "Mr. Tate," she said as we neared the end of my testimony, "in your opinion, how many people were victimized by this conspiracy?" "Based on the evidence I've seen, at least 30 men in Glacier Heights alone, but the investigation has turned up similar patterns in 3 other counties. The actual number could be much higher." "And the financial damage? Conservative estimate, $50 million in stolen assets, destroyed businesses, and fraudulent legal settlements." The grand jury returned indictments against 14 people, including Clarissa, Lenore, Judge Morrison, David Crane, and Sheriff Coleman. The trial was scheduled to begin in 6 months, but for me, the real trial had already ended. I'd gotten my justice, exposed the truth, and reclaimed my life. The farmhouse was mine again, legally and officially. My construction business was slowly rebuilding as the truth about my divorce became public knowledge. My children were home, damaged but healing. Most importantly, I'd learned something about myself. When pushed to the edge, when everything I cared about was stripped away, I hadn't broken. I'd become something else entirely. I'd become exactly what Clarissa had called me in that courtroom 6 months ago. A man who would die alone and broke rather than let evil triumph. Except I wasn't alone anymore, and I definitely wasn't broke. The Evers women had finally met their match. They'd destroyed a lot of men over the years, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd tried to destroy a man whose father had spent 30 years preparing for war, and in the end, that made all the difference. #. Epilogue. The New Order. 6 months later, I stood on the courthouse steps watching as Clarissa and Lenore Evers were led away in handcuffs. The trial had lasted 3 weeks and had been covered by news outlets across the country. The evidence had been overwhelming, the testimony devastating, and the verdict unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Clarissa got 15 years in federal prison. Lenore got 25. Judge Morrison got 12. David Crane got 18. Sheriff Coleman got 10. The network that had controlled Glacier Heights for 3 decades was finally broken. "How do you feel?" asked Sarah Chen, who'd been covering the trial for a national magazine. I looked out over the crowd of reporters, federal agents, and townspeople who'd gathered to witness the end of an era. Many of them were men I'd known my entire life, men who'd believed Lenore's lies, who'd turned their backs on me when I needed them most. Now they looked at me differently, not with pity or contempt, but with something approaching respect, maybe even fear. "I feel like justice has been served," I said. That evening, I drove back to the farmhouse where Lila and Nate were waiting for me. They'd both chosen to live with me during the trial, and we'd slowly begun rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy. Too much had been said, too much trust had been broken, but we were family, and family endures. "So it's over?" Lila asked as I walked into the kitchen. "It's over. What happens now?" I looked around the kitchen where I'd discovered my father's hidden room, where I'd learned the truth about my family's history, where I'd planned the campaign that had brought down the most powerful criminal organization in Montana history. Now, we move forward. We rebuild. We make sure something like this never happens again. Nate looked up from his homework. "Dad, are you going to run for sheriff? People are saying you should." I'd heard the same rumors. With Coleman in prison and his department under federal oversight, the county needed new leadership. Several people had suggested I throw my hat in the ring. "Maybe," I said. "But first, I've got a business to rebuild and a family to take care of." Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, I walked out to the barn where I'd stored all of Dad's evidence. The hidden room was empty now. Everything had been turned over to the FBI, but I could still feel his presence there. "We did it, Dad," I said to the darkness. "We won." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. We'd won this battle, exposed this conspiracy, brought these criminals to justice. But corruption is like weeds. Cut it down in one place and it grows back somewhere else. There would always be predators looking for victims, always be people willing to misuse their power for personal gain. The price of justice, like the price of freedom, is eternal vigilance. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, but I'd also learned something else. Sometimes, when the system fails, when the authorities are corrupted, when justice seems impossible, sometimes ordinary people have to become something more. Sometimes they have to become villains in order to defeat the real monsters. I walked back to the farmhouse, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new opportunities to choose between being a victim and being something else entirely. But tonight, for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. The war was over. Justice had been served, and the Tate family legacy would continue for another generation, just not the way anyone expected.